This is why your brand new brakes squeak when you slow down at low speeds, and it's not what most people think. You just spent hundreds of dollars on new brake pads and rotors. The mechanic assured you everything was installed perfectly. But now, every time you ease into a parking space or roll up to a stop sign, there's that unmistakable high-pitched squeal. It's embarrassing, it's annoying, and it makes you wonder if something went wrong. Here's the truth. That squeaking is actually physics in action, and in most cases, it's completely normal. Let me explain what's really happening under your hood. When you press the brake pedal, hydraulic pressure forces the brake pads against the spinning rotors. This creates friction, which converts your car's kinetic energy into heat and brings you to a stop. But that friction also creates something else: vibration. The squealing you hear is high-frequency vibration, typically between 1 and 20,000 hertz. Think of your brake rotor as a giant speaker cone. When the brake pads clamp down, they cause the rotor to vibrate, and those vibrations radiate outward as sound waves. At lower frequencies, around 1 to 4 kilohertz, the vibrations involve your entire brake system: the pads, rotors, calipers, even parts of your suspension. At higher frequencies, it's primarily just the pads and rotors creating that distinctive screech. The most common reason new brakes squeak is something called the bedding-in process. When brake pads and rotors are manufactured, their surfaces aren't perfectly smooth or matched to each other. During the first 100 to 200 miles of driving, these surfaces need to wear against each other to create what engineers call a transfer layer, a thin, even coating of brake pad material on the rotor surface. This bedding-in process is crucial for optimal braking performance, but it can be noisy. The surfaces are literally learning to work together, and until they develop that smooth interface, you'll likely hear squeaking, especially during gentle stops at low speeds. This is why the noise often disappears when you brake harder. The increased pressure and heat help speed up the bedding process. But bedding in isn't the only culprit. Moisture plays a surprising role in brake noise. If your car sits outside overnight, especially in humid conditions, a thin layer of rust can form on your rotors. Iron oxide, or rust, is harder than the underlying metal, so when you first apply the brakes in the morning, the pads scrape off this surface layer, creating a temporary squeak. This type of noise typically disappears after a few stops and isn't cause for concern. The composition of your brake pads also affects noise levels. Semi-metallic pads, which contain 30 to 70% metal content, are more prone to squeaking than ceramic pads. Those metal particles act like tiny grinding compounds, creating noise as they press against the rotor surface. It's the price you pay for the superior stopping power and heat resistance that semi-metallic pads provide. Ceramic pads, developed in the mid-1980s, are significantly quieter. Their dense ceramic composition vibrates at frequencies often beyond human hearing, resulting in much less audible noise. However, they're typically more expensive and may not provide the same level of performance under extreme conditions. Sometimes the squeaking comes from missing or improperly installed components. Brake pads should include thin metal shims that sit between the pad and the caliper. These shims dampen vibrations and reduce noise transmission. If a mechanic reuses old, worn shims or forgets to install them entirely, you'll likely hear squeaking. Similarly, brake pad clips that secure the pads to the calipers can lose tension over time, allowing the pads to vibrate more freely. Proper lubrication is another critical factor that's often overlooked. The caliper pins that allow the brake pads to move smoothly need high-temperature grease to function properly. Without adequate lubrication, these pins can seize, causing the pads to drag against the rotors and creating persistent noise. The backing plates of the brake pads also need lubrication at specific contact points to prevent vibration. One of the more serious causes of new brake squeaking is glazing. This happens when someone brakes aggressively before the pads are properly broken in. The excessive heat creates a smooth, hardened surface on the brake pads that reduces friction and causes persistent squealing. Glazed brakes don't just sound bad. They perform poorly and can be dangerous. Even tiny particles can cause big noise problems. Dust, small stones, or other debris trapped between the pad and rotor can create squeaking, especially at low speeds when there isn't enough braking force to crush or dislodge these particles. This is why keeping your brake components clean is important for both performance and noise control. There's also the issue of compatibility. Not all brake pads work equally well with all rotors. Using a pad compound that isn't suited for your specific rotors can lead to squealing, particularly during light braking. This mismatch doesn't just cause noise, it can lead to uneven wear and reduced braking performance. So when should you be concerned? If your new brakes are still squeaking after 500 miles, or if the squeaking is accompanied by grinding, vibration, or reduced braking performance, it's time for professional inspection. Grinding, in particular, is never normal with new brakes and usually indicates a serious installation problem. For most people dealing with new brake squeak, patience is the best remedy. Drive gently for the first few hundred miles, avoid aggressive stops, and give your brakes time to properly bed in. If you're dealing with morning moisture squeaks, a few firm stops usually clear them up quickly. The next time you hear that familiar squeal from your new brakes, remember that it's usually just the sound of precision engineering components learning to work together. Your rotors are acting like speakers, broadcasting the complex physics of friction and vibration. In most cases, that annoying noise is actually a sign that your braking system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Make sure you subscribe.